I was sitting in class when the substitute teacher stuck her hand out and said, "Spit out your chewing gum." I laughed nervously but put it in her hand anyway. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor. Her whole body started shaking like she was having a seizure. Multiple people called 911 at once, all yelling over each other. "Get the nurse! Get help! Somebody do something!" I just sat there frozen, pinching myself to see if I was in a fever dream. The nurse burst in with an EpiPen. Her throat's closing up. She jabbed it into Mrs. Pierce's thigh. Kids started backing away from my desk, and Ella grabbed my arm hard. "What did you do?" "Nothing, I just spit out my gum." Someone behind me whispered, "Murderer." The paramedics arrived and immediately put on double gloves before approaching me. One paramedic kept asking if she'd been stung by something or if anyone saw her take medication. They checked her arms and neck for bug bites. I kept saying she just asked about my gum, but he looked at me like I was wasting his time with irrelevant information. They wheeled her out, and her body was still twitching. Nobody else touched anything this student touched. "We need to isolate the source." One paramedic got in my face. "Have you been feeling sick? Any rashes?" "No, I feel fine, why?" They took my temperature anyway and checked my throat. Everyone watched like I was some kind of alien. The principal rushed in, and his eyes locked on me immediately. "Get all the other students out now." He nodded to the security guard. "Watch the door." "Sir, I don't understand what's happening. She just asked me to spit out. We need to contact your parents immediately." The vice principal leaned in and pointed at me, whispering, "Is this the one who vandalized?" They started photographing me from multiple angles. I tried to cover my face, but they told me to put my hands down. They took fingerprints from my desk with actual crime scene equipment. "Where did you get this gum?" the principal demanded. 7-Eleven? Is this even regulation gum? What does that even mean?" They ignored me and sent someone to check my other classes for more gum. The lunch ladies were brought in. "What did this student eat today?" "They sat alone at lunch," one said, like that was criminal. "Didn't wash hands before eating." "I used hand sanitizer." They pulled up my entire lunch purchase history on a laptop. "Has this student ever brought outside food?" My hands started shaking. "The superintendent's on his way," someone announced. "Pull up the student's disciplinary file." 3 tardies this semester," the secretary read. "Failed to turn in health forms." "Those were excused. My mom—" The school resource officer cut me off. "Your parents better have good insurance. This is assault with a deadly weapon." "What weapon?" "It was Trident watermelon gum. We'll need a full toxicology report." He was actually writing this down like I was a criminal. Someone mentioned Miranda rights. I felt like I was going to throw up. Through the office window, I could see parents gathering in the parking lot. Someone was passing around a clipboard, a petition. I sat in that office for 2 hours, while Mrs. Pierce's heart rate stabilized. Nobody would tell me anything. Every time I asked what was happening, they'd exchange looks and say, "Just wait." The principal kept asking what I'd eaten for lunch. It seemed like such a weird question when our substitute just almost died, but I told him. PB&J, apple, cookies. He wrote it all down and made a phone call to someone. 2 hours later, a woman burst through the door. It was Mrs. Pierce's daughter. The principal tried to explain what happened, but she cut him off. "You committed murder of a school employee." "What?" "I didn't—" "My mother has a severe peanut allergy." Her voice shook with rage. "It's in her file in red ink." My stomach dropped through the floor. She could have died. One particle can trigger anaphylaxis. The pieces clicked horribly into place. My peanut butter and jelly lunch. The gum after. I was suspended immediately. "Effective right now," the principal said, not meeting my eyes. Security escorted me out past the mob of parents. I figured that was it, but I was wrong. A week later, the college rejection letters started piling in. Every teacher who promised to write my recommendation letters mysteriously pulled out at the last minute. Then my mom's car tires were slashed. All 4. The final straw came when I got a call from my part-time job. Fired. Just like that. Everything traced back to the Pierce family. They'd ruined my life over peanut butter. Time to show them what real destruction tasted like. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down every way I could hurt them back, my pen pressing so hard it tore through the paper on some words. First idea was to slash their tires like they did to my mom's car. But that was too simple, too quick. Then I wrote about spreading rumors at their church, posting flyers around town with their lawsuit history, maybe even calling their insurance company with an anonymous tip about fraud. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going, filling page after page with plans that got darker as the night went on. I thought about sugar in their gas tank, dead fish in their mailbox, signing them up for every spam list on the internet. Around 3 in the morning, I had 20 pages of ideas, but none of them felt big enough to match what they'd done to me. The next morning, I couldn't sleep anymore, so I got in my car and drove past their house just to see it. Mrs. Pierce lived in one of those perfect suburban houses with the white fence and the garden gnomes, and her daughter's silver Honda was parked in the driveway with that stupid bumper sticker about her kid being an honor student at the elementary school. I slowed down enough to see their recycling bin was full of wine bottles, and their lawn was starting to go brown in patches. The curtains were still closed even though it was past 9, and I noticed they had one of those security company signs in their yard, probably new since the incident. I drove around the block 3 times memorizing every detail, where the streetlights were, which houses had dogs, whether there were any cameras visible. Then I headed to the library because I needed to be smart about this, couldn't use my own computer or internet for what I was planning. The library had those old computers in the back that nobody ever used, perfect for creating fake Facebook and Twitter accounts without leaving a trail back to me. I made 5 different profiles using random photos from stock image sites, gave them basic backstories about living in town for years, started following local business pages and community groups to make them look real. Each account had a different personality, but they all had one thing in common. They were going to start asking questions about the Pierce family. My first posts were careful, nothing too obvious, just innocent questions in the town Facebook group about whether anyone else had noticed how the Pierce family always seemed to get their way with the school board. Within an hour, 3 people had commented with their own stories about Mrs. Pierce throwing fits at PTA meetings when the bake sale couldn't accommodate her allergies, demanding special treatment at every school event, making other parents feel bad for bringing normal snacks to class parties. One mom said Mrs. Pierce had threatened to sue when her kids' birthday cupcakes were brought to the school, even though her daughter wasn't even in that class. I screenshotted everything and kept digging, using the library's access to public records databases that most people didn't know existed. That's when I found the gold mine. 3 separate lawsuits filed by Mrs. Pierce against local businesses in the past 5 years, all claiming negligent allergen exposure, all settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. There was the ice cream shop that had to pay out when she claimed cross-contamination, the bakery that settled after she said they didn't properly label their items, and even a lawsuit against the movie theater for serving Peanut M and Ms. The pattern was so obvious once you looked for it, they'd find a business, claim exposure, threaten to go public, then settle quietly. My phone buzzed with a Facebook message to one of my fake accounts from someone named Lance Crawford, who said he was a journalist with the local paper and had seen my posts about the Pierce family. He wanted to know if I had any more information about these lawsuits, said he'd been hearing rumors for years but nobody would go on record. I was careful with my response, told him I'd just noticed some patterns in public records, and thought it was interesting how often they seemed to end up in legal disputes. I sent him the case numbers for the lawsuits, but didn't give him anything that could trace back to me, let him do his own digging and draw his own conclusions. 3 days later, I was at the grocery store buying milk when I heard 2 moms in the next aisle talking about whether peanut allergies were even real or just parents being dramatic for attention. One of them mentioned seeing something online about the Pierce family's lawsuit history, wondered out loud if maybe some people used allergies as a way to get money from businesses. I pulled out my phone and posted from another fake account, a simple question asking if anyone else thought it was weird how many businesses in town had been sued for allergen exposure by the same family. The comments started flooding in within minutes, people sharing stories I hadn't even heard yet, connecting dots I hadn't seen. My mom walked into my room that night and saw me hunched over my laptop, asked what I was working on so intensely. The lie came out smooth and easy, told her I was researching community colleges since all my first choices had rejected me, looking at programs that might still accept late applications. She rubbed my shoulder and said she was proud of me for not giving up, that the Pierce family couldn't keep me down forever, and I felt sick about lying, but also weirdly proud of how good I'd gotten at it. My phone lit up with a text from Ella, saying she'd been thinking about what happened and something didn't feel right about the whole thing. She wanted to meet at the coffee shop tomorrow to talk, said she had some things she wanted to tell me about what she'd heard after I was suspended. Part of me thought it might be a trap, maybe the Pierce family sending her to get information about what I was doing, but another part hoped maybe she was starting to see the truth. I texted back that I'd meet her at 2 o'clock, already planning my escape routes in case things went bad. The next day, I got to the coffee shop early and sat where I could see both exits, watched Ella walk in looking nervous and guilty. She sat down across from me and immediately started apologizing for grabbing my arm that day, said she'd been caught up in the panic and didn't think straight. She told me she'd been noticing things since then, how the Pierce family seemed to have a lot of power in town, how Mrs. Pierce's daughter had bragged about getting me fired from my job, how the whole thing felt planned, somehow. I pulled out my phone to show her the fake accounts I'd been using, but then stopped myself because trusting anyone felt dangerous now. She leaned closer and whispered that Lance Crawford from the local paper had been asking questions around school about the Pierce family. My heart started racing because that meant my posts were actually working. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw it. Lance's article with the headline asking why one family had filed so many allergen lawsuits against local businesses. The comment section went crazy within minutes, with people sharing stories about Mrs. Pierce screaming at the bakery owner last year and her daughter threatening to sue the ice cream shop. I screenshot everything and saved it to multiple folders just in case. My mom came home that night looking tired and asked if I'd seen the article about the Pierce family online. I shrugged and said maybe I'd seen something, but tried to act like I didn't care even though my hands were shaking under the table. The next morning, Mrs. Pierce's daughter posted this long video on Facebook with tears running down her face, talking about how her family was attacked online for no reason. She wore this white shirt that made her look innocent and kept wiping her eyes with tissues while saying they were just trying to protect her mom's health. People in the comments started defending her and calling whoever started the rumors a monster. Some lady named Karen wrote that she hoped they found who was behind the hate campaign and pressed charges. I felt sick watching everyone buy her act when she'd literally destroyed my whole future over an accident. That night, I stayed up until 3 making a new email account and sent Lance all my college rejection letters with the dates circled in red. I included screenshots of my termination email from work and made sure to highlight how everything happened right after the gum incident. I didn't sign it or give any hints about who I was, but I knew he'd connect the dots. 3 days later, Lance published another article mentioning the strange timing of a local student losing college opportunities right after the substitute teacher incident. He was careful not to accuse anyone directly, but he included a timeline that made it pretty obvious what had happened. The Pierce family's supporters started fighting with people who thought something fishy was going on, and the whole town Facebook page turned into a war zone. I was eating breakfast when the phone rang and my mom answered looking confused. She covered the phone and mouthed that it was the principal, then her face went white as she listened. After she hung up, she sat down across from me and said the principal had warned her about inflammatory online activity that could result in legal action against our family. She asked if I knew anything about it, and I said no, while my stomach twisted into knots. The principal couldn't prove anything, but the threat was clear: back off, or they'd come after us even harder. That afternoon, I texted Ella, asking if she'd heard any news from the school, since I wasn't allowed back. She replied that her friend who worked in the office said Mrs. Pierce was scheduled to start substitute teaching again next week. The thought of her walking those halls teaching other kids while I was banned made my blood boil, so hot I thought my head would explode. I spent the rest of the day pacing my room and punching my pillow because the rage had to go somewhere or I'd lose my mind. Around midnight, I grabbed my dad's old hoodie and drove to the school with a can of spray paint I'd bought weeks ago for an art project. The parking lot was empty and dark with just one security light flickering near the main entrance. My hands shook as I sprayed "allergic to accountability" in huge red letters on the wall where everyone would see it when they arrived. It was stupid and reckless, but seeing those words on that wall felt better than anything had felt in weeks. I drove home with my heart pounding and threw the spray paint can in a dumpster behind the grocery store. The next morning, my phone blew up with texts from people sending me screenshots of the vandalism all over Facebook. The security footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie, but you couldn't see the face or license plate clearly. The principal called an emergency assembly about vandalism and consequences, according to Ella, who texted me updates throughout the day. She said he looked directly at her when he talked about how anyone with information should come forward immediately. Parents started posting about how the school wasn't safe anymore and demanding better security cameras. Some people thought it was funny and true, while others called it criminal property damage that proved someone was out of control. I stayed off social media that whole day and helped my mom clean the house to keep my mind busy. That evening, I got an email from someone named Nadine Vasquez saying she was a lawyer who'd read Lance's articles. She said she believed I might have a case for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress against the Pierce family. She offered to represent me pro bono because she'd dealt with them before in another case and knew their tactics. I Googled her and found she was legit with good reviews and an office downtown. We set up a meeting for the next day at a coffee shop on the other side of town where nobody would recognize us. She showed up wearing a business suit and shook my hand firmly before pulling out a legal pad. I told her everything from the beginning: the gum incident, the suspension, the college rejections, my mom's tires, losing my job, all of it. She took notes the whole time and asked specific questions about dates and documentation. When I finished, she looked me straight in the eye and said we had a strong case, but warned that going legal meant everything would become public. She paused and added that any revenge activities I might have engaged in could complicate things if they came to light. I nodded and tried to keep my face neutral, even though my mind was racing about the spray paint. We agreed to move forward, and she said she'd start preparing the paperwork immediately. 2 days later, I was home alone when I heard a car pull into our driveway. I looked out the window and saw Mrs. Pierce's daughter getting out of her BMW and marching toward our front door. I grabbed my phone and started recording before she even knocked. She pounded on the door, yelling that she knew I was home and we needed to talk right now. I opened the door but stayed behind the screen while keeping my phone recording in my pocket. She pointed her finger at me and said I needed to stop the harassment campaign immediately, or things would get much worse for me and my family. Her face was red, and she kept stepping closer to the door like she might try to come inside. I asked her to leave, but she kept going, saying her mom almost died because of me, and I was lucky they hadn't pressed criminal charges yet. She said they had connections everywhere in town and could make sure I never got into any college or got another job. I kept my voice calm and asked her again to get off our property, while she ranted about how I was ruining their reputation with lies. Finally, she stormed back to her car, yelling that this wasn't over and I'd regret messing with her family. My hands were shaking as I uploaded the video to Facebook that same night. I didn't blur her face or edit anything out. The whole recording showed her pointing at me through the screen door and threatening my family. Within an hour, it had 50 shares and hundreds of comments. People were shocked that a grown woman would go after a teenager like that. Some parents recognized her from the school events and started sharing their own bad experiences with her. The video spread through local Facebook groups, and someone even posted it on the town's Reddit page. By morning, it had thousands of views, and the comments were brutal. People called her a bully and said she should be ashamed of herself for threatening a kid. The principal called my house at 7 a.m., demanding I take it down immediately. I told him no, and hung up. 2 days later, a process server knocked on our door with legal papers. The Pierce family was filing for a restraining order, claiming I was running a harassment campaign against them. The paperwork said I was causing them emotional distress and damaging their reputation. My mom read through it and laughed at the part where they claimed to be victims. We had to appear in court the following week. Nadine met us at the courthouse wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a thick folder of evidence. She'd organized everything perfectly with tabs and labels. The timeline of my college rejections matched exactly with when the Pierce family started their campaign. She had screenshots of the job termination email that came right after the incident. She even had the police report from when my mom's tires were slashed, though they couldn't prove who did it. The judge was an older woman with gray hair who looked tired before we even started. The Pierce family's lawyer went first and painted me as a dangerous student who'd poisoned a teacher and was now stalking the family online. He showed printed screenshots of the fake social media accounts I'd made and tried to connect them to me. Nadine objected and pointed out they had no proof those accounts were mine. When it was our turn, Nadine laid out everything chronologically. She showed how the college rejection started immediately after the suspension. She had emails from my former boss saying he'd been pressured to fire me. She presented the threatening video I'd recorded of the daughter at our house. The judge watched it twice and frowned at the Pierce family's lawyer. After 2 hours of arguments, the judge granted a mutual restraining order, meaning neither side could contact the other. She said both families needed to move on and warned that any violations would result in criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, Nadine told me this was actually good for us because it protected me from further retaliation. That afternoon, Lance called me with huge news. He'd been digging through school records using a Freedom of Information request and found something incredible. The substitute teacher database showed Mrs. Pierce's allergy information was updated 3 days after the incident. The original file from when she first registered as a substitute had no allergy warnings at all. The famous red ink warning wasn't there until after she'd already collapsed in my classroom. Lance had copies of both versions with timestamps proving the change. He was writing an article about it for tomorrow's paper. Nadine practically ran to her car when I told her. She spent the rest of the day preparing our lawsuit against the Pierce family and the school district. The complaint was 40 pages long and alleged negligence on the school's part for not having proper allergy protocols. It accused the Pierce family of defamation and intentional interference with my economic opportunities. She filed it electronically that evening and hand-delivered copies the next morning. The school board called an emergency meeting for that Thursday night. The auditorium was packed with angry parents on both sides. Some supported the Pierce family and said the school needed better safety measures. Others thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion and the school had overreacted. One dad stood up and said if peanut residue was really that dangerous, then the school should ban all peanut products immediately. Another parent pointed out that would punish hundreds of kids for one incident. The arguing got so loud the board president had to call for order 3 times. They voted to table the discussion until their lawyers could review our lawsuit. Meanwhile, things were shifting in town. The daughter's best friend posted on Instagram that she couldn't support someone who would destroy a teenager's future over an accident. She said she'd seen the daughter's vindictive side before, but this was too much. Other people started distancing themselves too. The daughter's book club disbanded when half the members stopped showing up. Her yoga instructor asked her to find a different studio. Even the grocery store clerk, who'd always been friendly, started avoiding eye contact. Then something amazing happened. I got a voicemail from the admissions office at State University saying they were reconsidering my application. They'd received new information about my suspension and wanted to schedule a phone interview. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the first good news I'd had in weeks. My mom cried when I played the message for her. The next day, the Pierce family's lawyer called Nadine with a settlement offer. They would pay for my entire college education if I dropped the lawsuit and signed an NDA preventing me from ever discussing the incident publicly. Nadine said it was a decent offer financially, but warned that taking it meant they'd never admit wrongdoing. She said I should think about whether the money was worth letting them escape accountability. I spent hours going back and forth about what to do. That same week, my mom's boss called her into his office. He apologized for cutting her hours after the incident and admitted he'd been influenced by the gossip around town. He offered her extra shifts to make up for the lost income and gave her a small raise. He said he'd been wrong to take sides without knowing the full story. Mom accepted his apology, but I could tell she didn't fully trust him anymore. The whole town was choosing sides now, and relationships that had lasted years were falling apart over this mess. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning with Nadine's number showing up. She told me to check the news immediately because something happened at the Pierce house overnight. I pulled up the local news site and there it was, a photo of their front porch with a plastic bag sitting by the door. The article said someone left peanuts with a note that said Karma has allergies too, and the family was treating it as a threat. The cops were already at my house by 7 asking where I was last night. I showed them my work schedule and the security footage from my job that proved I was there until midnight. They still acted like I was guilty and said the Pierce family wanted to press charges for harassment. Nadine showed up while they were still questioning me and told them to leave unless they had actual evidence. The whole thing made me look worse even though I had nothing to do with it. 2 weeks later, Ella got called in for her deposition about the original incident. Nadine let me sit in the room while she testified, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ella admitted she grabbed my arm that day because everyone else was freaking out, and she got caught up in the panic. She said looking back, she realized I was just as confused as everyone else, and she felt bad for immediately blaming me. Her testimony was recorded, and Nadine said it would help our case since Ella was one of the first people to accuse me. The school board met again the following week, and finally did something useful. They announced new rules for substitute teachers that required them to submit verified medical documentation about any allergies before they could start working. The principal sent out an email saying this would prevent future incidents, and I wanted to scream that it was too late for me. It was a tiny victory, but at least they admitted their system was broken. Then, I heard through the grapevine that Mrs. M. Pierce was coming back to work, but not at the high school. They assigned her to the elementary school instead, which seemed insane to me. Parents started complaining immediately because little kids eat peanut butter all the time and can't be expected to wash their hands perfectly. The PTA had an emergency meeting where people argued about whether someone that allergic should be around kindergartners at all. My mom came home from the grocery store saying she overheard two moms saying Mrs. Pierce was putting herself in danger on purpose for attention. The anger I'd been carrying around was eating me alive, so I finally agreed to see a therapist. My mom found someone who took our insurance, and I went to my first appointment feeling stupid about the whole thing. The therapist listened to me rant for 20 minutes about how unfair everything was, and then asked me a simple question about what I wanted to happen next. I realized I'd been so focused on revenge fantasies that I wasn't thinking about my actual future. She helped me see that staying angry was keeping me stuck in that classroom where Mrs. Pierce collapsed. We made a plan to work through the trauma, but I still left feeling raw and exhausted. A month later came the worst part, my deposition with the Pierce family's lawyer. Nadine spent hours preparing me, going over every possible question they might ask. The lawyer was this older guy who kept trying to get me to admit I'd vandalized the school or made the online posts about them. I stuck to the truth, that I was angry, but didn't do those things, and he kept pushing and pushing. Nadine objected to half his questions, and we took 5 breaks because I was getting too upset. The whole thing took 6 hours, and by the end I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Lance called me the next week saying his investigation was ready to publish. He'd found 3 other families who had similar experiences with the Pierces, using the allergy to get money or destroy people who crossed them. One family had their small business shut down after Mrs. Pierce claimed they didn't take her allergy seriously at a catered event. Another family's kid got expelled from private school after accidentally bringing trail mix near her. The pattern was clear, and Lance had all the documentation to prove it. The article came out on a Sunday, and by Monday morning it had been shared over 1,000 times. People were finally seeing what I'd been saying all along. The school district's lawyers contacted Nadine that same week with a settlement offer. They would clear my disciplinary record completely and write a letter to all the colleges explaining that my suspension was an overreaction to a medical emergency. They also offered a small cash settlement for the damage to my education. Nadine said it wasn't everything we wanted, but it would help fix my college applications. I wanted them to admit more fault, but she reminded me that getting my record cleared was the most important thing. We were still negotiating when the next disaster happened. Mrs. Pierce had another allergic reaction at the elementary school when a 5-year-old hugged her after lunch. The kid had eaten a peanut butter sandwich and hadn't washed his hands. This time, people weren't as sympathetic, because everyone was asking why she kept putting herself in these situations. The parents at the elementary school started a petition to have her transferred somewhere else. My old boss from my part-time job called that afternoon. He said he'd read Lance's article and realized he'd been pressured by the Pierce family's threats about lawsuits. He offered me my job back with all the back pay I'd missed. I needed the money for college, so I said yes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was just covering his own ass. The trust between us was completely gone, and going back to work. There felt like admitting defeat somehow. 3 weeks later, we were all sitting in a conference room at some law office downtown for the mediation. The room had this huge table, and everyone looked uncomfortable being there. Mrs. Pierce sat across from me with her daughter right next to her, and their lawyer on the other side. Nadine had warned me this would be tough, but I wasn't ready for what happened next. About an hour into going over all the documents and evidence, Mrs. Pierce just started crying. Not quiet tears either, but full-on sobbing while her daughter tried to shush her. "I never wanted any of this to happen," she kept saying between sobs. Her daughter grabbed her arm hard and told her to stop talking, but Mrs. Pierce kept going anyway. "This whole thing got out of control, and I'm so sorry." Her daughter's face turned red, and she whispered something harsh that made Mrs. Pierce stop talking completely. The mediator called for a break, and that's when I realized who was really running this whole revenge campaign against me. During the break, Nadine pulled me aside to show me something on her laptop. She'd been digging into court records from other states and found 3 different lawsuits filed by Mrs. Pierce's daughter in the past 5 years. Each one was for harassment or defamation against people who'd supposedly wronged her mother. The pattern was so obvious once you saw it all laid out. They'd move to a new town, find someone to target when something went wrong, get money through threats or lawsuits, then move again. One family in Ohio had their bakery almost shut down after Mrs. Pierce claimed they didn't take her allergy seriously. Another case in Michigan involved a teacher who got fired after accidentally bringing almonds to a staff meeting. Nadine had printed everything out, and when we went back into the mediation room, she slid the papers across the table. Their lawyer's face went white when he saw it all. The mediator spent the next 2 hours going through everything, and finally said what we all knew was coming. He recommended the Pierce family pay for my college costs, plus damages for the lost job and other stuff, but they wouldn't have to admit they did anything wrong legally. It made me so mad that they could destroy my life and just write a check to make it go away. Nadine squeezed my hand under the table and reminded me that going to trial would take years and might not end any better. The meeting ended with them saying they needed time to think about it. I spent the next 4 days barely sleeping and going back and forth about what to do. My mom sat with me at the kitchen table going through all the pros and cons over and over. She kept reminding me that my future was more important than making them admit what they did. "You can rebuild your life with that money," she said. "Or you can spend years fighting and maybe get nothing." She was right, but it still felt wrong to let them buy their way out of this. On the 5th day, Nadine called to say they'd agreed to the settlement but wanted a full NDA, so I could never talk about what happened. That was their final offer, and if we didn't take it, they'd fight us in court forever. I told Nadine, absolutely not. If I took their money, I at least wanted people to know the basic facts about what really happened. We went back and forth for another week with lawyers arguing about every little detail. Finally, their lawyer admitted that going to trial would be worse for them because all the evidence about their past lawsuits would become public record. They agreed to the settlement with no NDA on the basic facts, just couldn't share the settlement amount or their personal information. The check came through 2 weeks later, and when I saw the amount, I actually felt sick. It was enough for 4 years of college, plus living expenses, plus extra for all the damage they'd caused. My mom cried when she deposited it because she'd been so worried about how we'd pay for college after everything that happened. The money sat in that account feeling dirty, like I'd sold out somehow, but it was also my only chance at the future they'd tried to steal from me. A week after that, 2 of the colleges that had rejected me sent new letters. The school district had finally sent out their letter explaining that my suspension was an overreaction to a medical emergency and shouldn't be held against me. One was my dream school 3 states away, and the other was local. I picked the one farthest from this town without even thinking twice. I needed to go somewhere nobody knew this story, where I could just be a normal college student instead of the kid who almost killed a teacher with peanut butter. The same day I accepted the college offer, Mrs. Pierce's daughter posted another video online trying to play victim one last time. She talked about how her family was persecuted and forced to pay money they didn't have, but this time the comment section destroyed her. People had seen Lance's articles and knew about their history of lawsuits. Someone posted screenshots of the other families they'd targeted. Another person found records showing they weren't poor at all, but had plenty of money from all their previous settlements. Within 3 hours, she deleted the video, but screenshots were everywhere. 2 days later, she posted that they were moving to another state for a fresh start because of all the harassment they'd faced here. Good riddance. Graduation day came faster than expected, and the principal had called to say I was allowed to walk with my class despite everything. My mom helped me iron my cap and gown the night before, and we didn't talk about how different this day was supposed to be. When they called my name, some people clapped while others stayed silent. A few parents actually booed, but I kept my head up and walked across that stage knowing I'd survived everything they'd tried to do to me. I shook the principal's hand even though part of me wanted to refuse, took my diploma, and walked off that stage finally free from that place. The next week there was an award ceremony for local journalism, and Lance won first place for his investigation into the Pierce family. In his acceptance speech, he thanked a brave young person who refused to be silenced without saying my name. He held up that award and said sometimes the truth takes time to come out, but it always finds a way. I watched the live stream from my room while packing for college and actually smiled for the first time in months. The next morning, my mom and I took the settlement check to the auto shop to finally fix her car the right way. The mechanic showed us the damage from the slashed tires and said whoever did it used a box cutter based on the cut patterns. My mom didn't say anything about it, but I saw her jaw tighten when she signed the repair order. We used part of the settlement money, and she kept the receipt in a folder she labeled evidence, even though we both knew we'd never need it again. That same week, Ella started texting me and asked if I wanted to grab coffee after school. I met her at the Starbucks near campus, and she told me how watching me fight back against the Pierce family made her realize she'd been letting people walk all over her too. She'd finally reported the girls who'd been stealing her lunch money since freshman year, and they got suspended. We started hanging out more, and she helped me pack for college while telling me about her own plans to study nursing. She said that day in class when Mrs. Pierce collapsed, taught her she wanted to help people in medical emergencies, instead of just standing there frozen. I drove past the Pierce house one afternoon and saw the for sale sign had been up. So long it was starting to fade. The realtor told my mom at the grocery store that nobody wanted to buy it after everything that happened. People in town called them the lawsuit family now, and nobody wanted that bad energy in their house. I spent 3 days writing my college essay about the whole mess and how it taught me that injustice can happen to anyone, but fighting back matters more than winning. The admissions counselor emailed me later, saying it was one of the strongest essays she'd read that year, and it showed real character growth. A letter came from Mrs. Pierce 2 weeks before graduation, and I could tell her lawyer wrote it because it used words like regrettable incident and unintended consequences. She said she was sorry for how things escalated, but never actually admitted they went too far. I kept the letter in my desk drawer as a reminder that some people will never really take responsibility. The school sent out an email about new mandatory allergy training for all staff and students starting next year. Kids started calling it the Pierce Protocol when teachers weren't around, but nobody said it to their faces. They made everyone watch a video about cross-contamination and how to use an EpiPen, and the principal announced zero tolerance for food bullying. My last week in town, I had to drive past their house to get to the bank and saw a moving truck in the driveway. Workers were loading boxes and furniture, while Mrs. Pierce stood on the lawn directing them. I didn't feel happy or sad or angry, just empty where all that rage used to live. 3 months later, I was at freshman orientation, listening to the residence life coordinator talk about roommate agreements. Nobody knew who I was or what happened, and I liked it that way. When people asked where I was from, I just said a small town and changed the subject. My roommate showed up on move-in day and immediately told me he had a severe tree nut allergy. I helped him check every food item I'd brought and threw out anything that might have been processed near nuts. We put up signs on our door and established a whole system for keeping him safe because I knew how serious allergies were, but also knew they shouldn't be used as weapons. He was grateful I took it seriously without him having to explain why it mattered. We became good friends, and he never knew about my history with allergy-related drama. Nadine texted me in October saying the Pierce family was investigated for insurance fraud in their new state. Someone had tipped off the authorities about their pattern of lawsuits and settlements. She swore it wasn't her, but said she wasn't surprised someone finally connected the dots. The investigator had called her for information about our case, and she'd provided all the documentation showing their history. I asked if I needed to do anything, and she said no, just focus on the school and let karma handle the rest. My mom visited for Parents' Weekend and mentioned the town was different now. People had learned something from what happened even if they didn't want to talk about it directly. The school had better policies, and parents were more careful about not turning accidents into vendettas. She said the Pierce house finally sold to a young family who got it for way under asking price. The new owners didn't know the whole story, and my mom didn't tell them. That winter break, I ran into the principal at Target, and he stopped me near the electronics section. He said he was sorry for how he handled everything, and that he should have investigated more before suspending me. I told him it was done and I was doing fine at college, but I didn't forgive him. Some things change you, and some bridges stay burned, and that's okay. My college friends eventually found out pieces of the story when someone Googled my name and found Lance's articles. They couldn't believe something so small turned into something so destructive, but they also said they were impressed I fought back and won. One of them said if that happened to her, she would have just given up. But I told her you don't know what you'll do until someone tries to destroy your whole future over nothing. Parents' Weekend came up in October, and my mom drove 6 hours to visit me at college. We walked around campus, and she kept looking at other families, and then told me the town was different since everything happened. Nobody really talked about it directly, but people had learned something from watching how fast things got out of control. The school changed their policies, and parents were more careful about not turning every little thing into a huge fight. She said the Pierce house finally sold to a young couple who got it cheap because nobody else wanted it. I showed her around the dorms and introduced her to my roommate, who she liked right away. We went to the dining hall, and she noticed how I checked every food label carefully now, and how I always washed my hands twice before eating anything. That night after she left, I sat at my desk filling out the paperwork to declare my major. I wrote pre-law on the form and thought about Nadine and how she fought for me when nobody else would. I wanted to be like her and help other people who got caught up in someone else's mess. The advisor asked why pre-law, and I told her I'd seen how the legal system could destroy someone or save them, and I wanted to be on the saving side. She signed my forms and said I'd need to keep my grades up for law school, which I already knew. I threw myself into studying and joined the debate team and mock trial club. My phone buzzed one night the next year with a message from Ella. She said Mrs. Pierce's daughter got arrested for harassment in their new town in Arizona. Someone there was ready for their tricks and had recorded everything from day one. The woman had tried the same thing with another family, but this time, the police weren't buying it. Ella sent me the news article, and I read it 3 times before I believed it was real. The pattern had continued, but finally someone stopped them. I didn't feel happy exactly, but more like the universe had finally balanced itself out. Second semester, I joined the legal aid clinic on campus that helped students with disciplinary problems. My first case was a freshman who got suspended for something he didn't do, and I helped him gather evidence to appeal. We won his case and got his record cleared, and he thanked me with tears in his eyes. The clinic supervisor said I had a natural ability to see through administrative BS and find the real story. More students came to me for help, and I realized my horrible experience actually gave me skills other people needed. Winter break came, and I was at the grocery store buying stuff for dinner when I turned the corner and almost ran my cart into the principal. He froze when he saw me, and then started apologizing right there by the frozen vegetables. He said he was sorry for rushing to judgment and that he was just trying to protect the school from getting sued. His hands were shaking and he kept saying he should have investigated more before suspending me. I listened to him talk for 5 minutes straight without interrupting. When he finally stopped, I told him I was accepted his apology, but I didn't forgive him. Some bridges are supposed to stay burned, and that was a lesson I learned the hard way. He nodded and walked away, and I never saw him again after that. Back at the school, my friends were hanging out in my room when someone Googled my name for fun and found Lance's articles. They read the whole story out loud and kept stopping to ask if it was really true. They couldn't believe something so small turned into something so huge and destructive. One girl said she would have just given up if that happened to her, but I told her you don't know what you'll do until someone tries to take everything from you. They said they were impressed I fought back and won instead of letting them destroy me. The story spread through our friend group, and people started coming to me for advice about their own problems with unfair treatment. 3 years passed, and I was sitting in my law school orientation, listening to the dean talk about justice and advocacy. The firm that sponsored my full scholarship specialized in defamation cases, and they'd recruited me specifically because of my background. My supervising attorney said the Pierce family had accidentally given me the perfect origin story for this kind of law. I was going to spend my career turning injustice into justice one case at a time and help people who got steamrolled by someone with more power. The girl sitting next to me asked why I chose defamation law, and I told her it chose me when I was 17, and someone tried to ruin my life over peanut butter. She laughed, thinking I was joking, but then saw my face and realized I was serious. That's when I knew I'd found my calling, and the Pierce family's attempt to destroy me had actually created exactly who I was supposed to become. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. It's been a ride just wondering together. Until next time, take care out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.